Good morning and welcome to our very first day of the 5th annual Pflugerville Seniors Conference. My name is Rob Fabian with Age of Central Texas, and we are very excited to once again be partnering with our friends over at the Pflugerville Community Church to bring you this annual conference filled with information, resources, and things that you need to know to live healthy and a wonderful life right here in Central Texas. This is our 5th annual conference. As you know, if you have attended in the past, we would normally be over at the Pflugerville Community Church with a big resource fair and our speakers live. Unfortunately, COVID does not allow us to do that this year, so we're going to go virtual. We wanted to make sure that we still had an opportunity to bring you these great speakers that we had planned for this year. So we're going to do the conference virtually. And so we're so excited that you're joining us this morning. We'll be using this same Zoom link for all 4 of our presentations this week. And this morning we are excited that we're going to have Lorna Allen with us, and we're going to talk about how to pay for long-term care. Before we get started though, I've got a very quick video that I want to show you. We are very lucky that we have some wonderful folks in the community that have stepped up to be sponsors this year to help us pay for the hard cost of being able to present this. And one of those folks is Michael Gill over at Texas Senior Living Locators. He is a great friend of ours, and I wanted to share some information from him. So here is Michael.
Hello, my name is Michael Gill, and I own Texas Senior Living Locators. I have a free consulting service helping families of seniors find assisted living, independent living, and memory care. It's a free service to you because I'm paid a commission by wherever they end up going. Unlike all the online companies, I am a service that's boots on the ground, meaning I have visited every place in town, whether it's independent living, assisted living, memory care, or small personal care homes. I'm objective, and my only goal is to help your parent find the best place for themselves. The criteria we use is to find the place that's closest to family so that family can visit as often as possible, where it's an appropriate price point, because of course not everybody can afford everything that there is in senior living, and where they get the best care possible. Now, people often ask me, why do I have to move from the house? You don't have to move from the house, and it's an intensely personal decision when the time comes to move your parent. I have 3 rules, however, when it is absolutely necessary that you move. The first rule is, if somebody is a danger to themselves at home, then they must move. This could mean that somebody is taking their medications inappropriately. For example, I've gotten called many times for somebody who's in a nursing home or in the hospital because they have overdosed on their medications by taking them 5 times in a row because they forgot they'd already taken them. In this case, somebody ends up in the hospital. So that's one reason why somebody may be unsafe at home. Another reason may be that they're wandering outside, or they're driving inappropriately, or they're leaving the stove on. You can imagine all the different possibilities. The second reason that you need to move from a house to an assisted living or nursing home type of scenario is when somebody would be healthier if they were away from home. Most of the time what this means is that they're doing a lot of self-neglect. For example, they're not taking their medications, or they're not eating appropriately, or they're a big fall risk. Sometimes it's just better to be in an assisted living or memory care. The third reason that you have to move is when there are caregiver issues. By this I mean, for example, an 85-year-old woman who's taking care of her 90-year-old husband, and now she's aging out of the ability to be able to give him all the care he needs. Or where the children can't give enough help to their parents because the parents are falling during the daylight, during work hours. Or when you can no longer afford paying for enough care to come into the house, and it just makes more sense to move someplace else. At any rate, my name is Michael Gill. I own Texas Senior Living Locators. If you call me, I can help you find the best place for your parent or loved one, and we can do an efficient search together. Usually I'll put people in my car and we'll go visit places together. In times of the coronavirus, of course, that's not always possible. So what we end up doing is a lot of Zoom calls and Zoom meetings. So we're doing virtual tours. But we can get you a good idea of what's going on even during pandemic times. Again, Michael Gill, Texas Senior Living Locators is my company. TexasSeniorLivingLocators.com, And if you want my phone number, it's 512-630-7133.
Thank you, Michael. And we want to do a little quick housekeeping for you before we get started. Number one is that we are recording our sessions. So if for any reason you get kicked off, or if there's a slide that you want to go back and look at later, we're going to be uploading our sessions to YouTube, and you'll be able to watch them later, or you can share them with friends. Go back and check anything that you need that you didn't quite catch the first time. Number two, when we sent you the link for today, we also sent you links for the program. We have a PDF program. We encourage you to take a look at that. Not only are you going to find the bios for all of our speakers, but you'll find information for all of our sponsors, like Michael Gill. You'll find his ad with his information there. We also included a lot of great resources for you as well in that program. So take a look at that program. If you did not get that link, you can go back to the AGE website and click on the Pflugerville Senior Conference page, and it's there where you can download it and look at it there as well. Number three, and finally, there is a chat feature here on Zoom. It's right down here on your screen. It looks like one of those thought bubbles from the comic strips. We want you to click on that chat, and we want you to ask questions today during the presentation. Because remember, we're doing this for you. This is information we want you to have. And this is an opportunity for you to get your questions answered from an amazing financial planner. So if you have specific questions about your situation, or if you have a question about something that Lorna is going to discuss today that you don't quite understand, ask that question. Because at the end of today's session, we're going to have a facilitated Q&A. And we will go through all of the questions that have been asked in the chat box, and Lorna will answer them for you. Now, in the event that we end up running long today, because we want to honor your time, we said we were going to stop at 11:30, and that's what we're going to do. In the event we get a lot of questions and we're not able to answer all of the questions live, we're still going to answer your question. If we don't get to your question for any reason, either Lorna or someone from AGE of Central Texas is going to contact you directly via email, and we're going to answer your question for you. So please ask those questions, because again, this is for you. This is why we're doing this. We want you to have the opportunity to have all the information that you need so that you are able to age successfully here in Central Texas. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Lorna Allen to you. She is a financial planner with New York Life. She has been a wonderful resource here in Central Texas for a number of years. She specializes in working with women, healthcare professionals, and business owners to create effective, efficient, and strategic, keyword there, strategic retirement plans to help people reach their personal and professional financial goals. She got her MBA from Baylor University. She has a BA in psychology from the University of Texas at Austin, and a master's in clinical neuropsychology from the University of Texas at Tyler. She is also a professional speaker and provides educational seminars and presentations throughout the whole state of Texas. I've had the pleasure of being a part of those sessions for a number of years, and that's why we wanted to have Lorna come and present for you today. Personally, I believe she is one of the best in the business, and so very excited to have you with us, Lorna. Thank you so much, Lorna. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you go.
Thank you so much. That's such a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. So I want you all to know that I am so thrilled to be here. And what I hope that you take away from this is that you know at least a little bit more and feel a little bit more prepared than you did coming into this session. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to share my screen here so that everyone can see the PowerPoint presentation. And as Rob said, if you miss any part of it, feel free to go back to the YouTube channel because it will be uploaded there. So we're going to talk today about how to plan for long-term care. Now, there are a lot of things that people don't understand that comes into this, so hopefully you'll have some ideas about what some of those variables are, but that also at the end of this, our time together, you'll actually have kind of at least a structure or some very good ideas about the who, the what, the how, those kinds of things. So let's go ahead and see how we can plan for our long-term care. Okay, so he already told you about me. So let's talk about these pillars of joyful aging. So if we're lucky, we'll get to age and become older Americans. And there are 5 core pillars of life that are going to affect us and our ability to live joyfully as we age. So as you see here, those pillars are health, family, social relationships, financial security, and our peace of mind. So consider that these 5 pillars are how we age joyfully, but not only individually, but also as a collective. These pillars are going to have an impact on how joyful our lives are as we age. And we don't have to really be perfect in any one area, but we do want to understand that the stronger we are in several of these areas, then the more joy we'll have in our lives, because hopefully it will mean that we are less stressed. Now, we all need, we all seem to have a need for long-term care, because long-term care really can impact each of those 5 pillars. So, question for all of you: what do you think of when you think of long-term care? Do you think of nursing homes? Do you think it's expensive? Do you not really understand what it's all about? So just kind of ask yourself that question. What do I think about when I think of long-term care? What does it mean? So there's typically an assumption that long-term care is going to take place in a nursing home. And long-term care is more likely to be a need when we're older. Long-term care services can also be quite expensive. However, if you're open to thinking about broader implications of long-term care, then it gives you more options. So today we're going to talk about why it makes sense to develop a long-term care plan. We don't necessarily need to put all of the pieces in place today, but to just start thinking about it. And so throughout the rest of our time together, we're just going to start going through the process and thinking about how we can personalize our own long-term care plan. And remember that the most important reason to develop a long-term care plan is because most people are going to have a need for long-term care, and it really impacts the lives of not only our own personal lives, the ones that need it, but the lives of our family and even our friends. So if we want to have a good plan in place, these are some of the things that we should all be thinking about. Now, I do also want to mention that long-term care is definitely a financial issue, but it's not just a financial issue. It's also really not just a medical issue, although your health can certainly be impacted if you need long-term care. A need for long-term care can instead impact all of the aspects of the life that you've worked so hard to nurture and protect, to grow, and all of those things. So let's talk about retirement, our later years, how it's supposed to be joyful and rewarding, so that, because we've worked so hard all of our working life, and now it's time for us to enjoy the fruits of our labor. So long-term care planning can help us protect all those years. It might even allow us to get more out of those years, knowing that if we do someday need care, we'll already have something in place and we don't have to worry too much. So we've talked a little bit about, or I've mentioned, why is it important to create a long-term care plan? As you see here, there are several reasons. It really and truly allows people to have control over the type of care they're going to receive, who's going to give it to them, and where it's going to occur. So when you create this plan, then you maintain control over your situation. And if you want to stay at home as long as possible, you can actually do that. It also protects your retirement. It protects your family. It gives you that relief and that peace of mind that you have something ready to go if and when that need occurs. Now, many people already know this, but just for the sake of comprehensiveness, I want us to just touch on what long-term care actually means. So when we talk about long-term care, what we really mean is that at some point you are needing a long-term care service. And when you need a specific type of service, we're talking about some kind of help from somebody else. It's something that's too difficult. It's basic, but it's a little bit too difficult for one person to take care of, or the individual to take care of themselves. So it could be things as simple as eating, dressing, bathing, toileting, transferring, continence care. Sometimes it goes into being able to, make food, prepare food, cook in the kitchen. It could be going to and from doctor appointments because maybe you can't drive anymore. So a lot of times you will see these definitions, and they may include more definitions, or they may include a little bit fewer, but typically these are the 6 basic pieces of long-term care services that we're typically talking about, and you may also know these as activities of daily living. Now, as I mentioned before, aging is a normal part of life. I tell everybody, look, we're all on the same path. We're just at different points along that path, but we're all going to the same place and we're all on that same path. So long-term care isn't necessarily something that we should recoil from or think about as being bad. Needing long-term care means that you've lived a long life well. It also could mean that you might need long-term care because you've had an injury or you've had some kind of illness. And sometimes, for example, people just need long-term care as they recover from cancer or from a fall or something like that. So don't ever think that long-term care is, something that is necessarily a bad thing. These are all things that we see as a normal part of aging. Another example I typically like to talk about is, as we get older, sometimes our bones start to get a little bit more brittle. We fall, a bone breaks, and we just need a little bit of extra help as we're recovering. And then once we recover, things are back to normal, and we no longer need any kind of long-term care service. All right, so who's going to need long-term care? The answer is truly most of us eventually will need it. In fact, as you can see here, the majority of us will eventually develop a need for long-term care. And there are lots of different studies available that provide data on the risk of eventually needing long-term care. I do want to mention that for the purpose of this presentation, I'm really going to just be referencing the U.S. Department of Health Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation study. And this is from the 2016 study. And these are where I'm getting the statistics. So as of March of 2019, also the U.S. Health and Human Services website, which is longtermcare.acl.gov, notes that someone turning age 65 today has almost a 70% chance of needing some type of long-term care services and supports in their remaining years. So no matter which study you're going to reference, this 2016 one or the one from 2019 that I just mentioned, the fact is that most Americans turning age 65 will eventually need some long-term care type of service. If you want to get any additional services, you can also go to the federal government website, which is longtermcare.acl.gov, as I mentioned before. Okay, so let's kind of take a sheet of paper out and let's kind of get into some of this nitty-gritty kind of thing. So here is how we're going to start talking about creating some kind of a plan, or at least the basics of a plan. So we're going to talk about the who, the who, where, how, and the solution as we move through our time together today. So let's talk about each of these in turn. So we will talk first about how our health, our family, and our social relationships can actually be impacted by the need for long-term care. So here's a good question. Who would you want to provide care for you if you need it? Now, a lot of people are likely to mention their spouse or their children, even some friends. Think about or describe what the process might be if your children or your spouse or your friends have to provide long-term care for you. Think about the activities of daily living that we discussed on the earlier slide. Which of these would you want your care provider to help you with? And I've had many people say, I don't want my son or my daughter to take me to the bathroom. I don't want my husband to bathe me every night. I don't, so you have, if you think about all the things that you do for yourself in terms of your personal care and in terms of those activities of daily living, think about who you would want to do those things for you or with you. Okay, so now that you've thought about that, go ahead and just jot down who is that person and what do you want them to do? Do you want somebody to manage your care, or do you want that person to actually provide that care? And if that person's not available, who else would provide that care for you? Do you want it to be a family member, or do you want it to be a friend, or do you want to hire somebody to do that for you? Now, here's another good question. Does your who person know that they are your who person? Do they know that they are the ones that you want to be responsible for providing or planning your care for you? Because that's going to impact their life. So think about those kinds of things. Okay, so now that I've kind of made you start thinking a little bit about how it's going to affect their lives, let's talk about that. The impact on family caregivers can be pretty intense. The average age of a caregiver, as you see on this slide, is about 45 years of age. Now think about the average or the typical 45-year-old. They're probably in the midst of their wealth earning years, right? They probably have children of their own, and they also have parents. You may be that 45-ish year old person, okay? Now, the percentage of caregivers that are uncompensated, especially women, especially female family members, uncompensated, 75%. So out of all the people that are providing care to a loved one, a husband, a wife, well, I guess in this case it would be a husband because we're talking about female caregivers, but a husband, a parent, an uncle, a grandparent, whatever, 75% of them are women and 75% of them are not being compensated for that. And it's pretty much a full, at least a part-time job. Although I've met many, many families and planned with many families, and they tell me they've had to quit their jobs to be able to take care of their parents or their grandparents. So it becomes quite encompassing. And when you think about if it's a spouse that you need to take care of, it's even more hours than that. It becomes more than a full-time job. And the thing is that you never leave. So many times what I've seen in real life is that when an individual who needs a lot of care, if they have care coming into the home, care providers coming into the home, then they tend to be a little bit more at ease and more comfortable. The families tend to maintain their family bonds and they don't feel stressed out and they don't get resentful. And the reason is because they know that they have relief and they're not responsible for everything that somebody needs to do throughout the day. Sleeping, eating, getting dressed, going to the bathroom, shopping, running errands, all those things. The entire responsibility is not on one person, but instead it gets transferred to maybe a paid caregiver, or it gets dispersed among several family members. And so it tends to ease the tensions that sometimes we see. And so having a plan for care really does help to alleviate a lot of stress. So here's a few more statistics. A lot of caregivers that incur out-of-pocket costs as a result of caregiving, 78%. The majority of caregivers are going to pay for things out of pocket. That's a pretty overwhelming statistic if you think about it, because if you think about, let's just say you're making 100,000 a year, and now you can't take that family trip because that extra money that went to the family vacation is now going to pay for a place for mom or dad to live, or to pay for medications that mom or dad's insurance doesn't cover, or they have more out-of-pocket doctor or medical expenses. So think about those things. So here's where the rubber is hitting the road. Even if you're not providing the care, you may still be financially contributing to provide the care. So it becomes a pretty big variable here. And then out-of-pocket costs tend to be on average about $7,000, although I've seen a lot of families put in or contribute a lot more than $7,000 a year to help pay for caregiving costs. And the percentage of family caregivers that experience at least one work-related strain, they have to take time off work, they hurt their back and whatever, over 50%. I've known so many family members that thought that they could take care of their parents, and they work full time, then they come home and they're providing care for their parents, and during a transfer or just helping mom or dad get up off a chair, they strain their back, and now they're out of work for 3 weeks while they recover, and they still have the stress of providing care. So those are some of the things that we need to think about. So next question then, where is this long-term care going to take place? Let's talk about the options. Your home is definitely one place. It can be in your community. It can be in an assisted living community, or it can be in a nursing home. Now, we know that if we talk about assisted living, that we can also break that down a little further into communities that are specifically geared for people with dementia. So that encompasses that type of a community as well. So think about where. So on your sheet of paper, just write down, where would you want to receive your care? Do you want to stay at home for as long as possible? Would you like to go out into the community, like an adult care, daycare for a while or during the day? Do you want to move into an assisted living or a memory care if the need is there? Or would you prefer to move into a nursing home? Now, I'll tell you, I seldom have anybody say to me they want to move into a nursing home. So and of course, there are certain criteria for nursing home, being admitted to a nursing home. So think about that. So where would you like to receive your care? And just write that down. So let's talk about that now. Here's some interesting facts. 80% of people receiving long-term care today pretty much live at home or in a community setting, not in a nursing home. 80%, which is why we see so many of these assisted living facilities popping up, and independent living communities popping up. So 80% of people that need long-term care are going to be at home or in a community setting of some sort. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about financial security and how our finances are going to impact our long-term care. Do you have any idea how much long-term care costs? Now, we mentioned earlier that most people think it's quite expensive, and it can be, but let's talk about that. How are we going to pay? How are you going to pay for your long-term care costs? If you're at home, how will you pay? If you move into an assisted living or a memory care or a nursing home, how are you going to pay? So just jot down a few bullet points about where you think the money is going to come from in order to pay for long-term care. Now let's talk about costs. So what I've done here is I'm providing to you some national averages as well as some local averages of long-term care costs, okay? And I'm breaking it down. So for home care, the national average is a little over $23. In the Austin area, it's just under $23, but this number seems to be rising. My understanding is that a lot of home care providers are now charging, for example, $25 an hour with a minimum of 3 hours, and you know they can that can change if they need it to change. So I would always estimate a little bit higher than the local average. Austin is becoming a little bit more, they're attracting a lot of retirees because a lot of their adult children are moving to Austin because of all the opportunities and the lifestyle of Austin. And so we're starting to see an upward trend, or we have been seeing an upward trend in the costs of home care. Now, what about assisted living? Let's take a look at these numbers, these costs. Austin is a little bit higher than the average cost for assisted living. So you can see monthly that in the Austin area, a 1-bedroom apartment in an assisted living community is almost $5,000. 2-bedroom is over $5,000, and actually it's probably truly pushing about $6,000. So those are some costs. And as we go through these, these few slides here, think about where your money is going to come from to cover these. And nursing home. Nursing home costs in the Austin area for a private room are pushing over $90,000 a year. For a semi-private, a little over $65,000. So again, where is that money going to come from? So let's talk about a lifetime cost of long-term care. When we think about how long over our lifetime we might need to go in and out of long-term care situations, then that's why we're talking about this kind of lifetime cost. The average is $172,000, but remember, an average takes into account the two extremes. So I always like to tell people, think about, adding a little bit more to that just to be on the safe side. So if the average is 172, you may say 185,000. Or if you know in your family that there is longevity, but it's not, but there are some medical issues in your family history, then you may want to add a little bit more to that, maybe 200 or 250 or something. So every family is a little different. Every individual is different. So just thinking about those long-term care costs over your entire life gives us something to start planning towards. Okay. All right, so let's talk now about some solutions. What are our opportunities so that we can create our long-term care plan? So let's list now a couple of things. We're just going to briefly touch on Medicare, briefly touch on Medicaid. Are you going to rely on those to help you cover those costs, or are you going to rely on your family? Do you have the ability to pay out of pocket, or do you have insurance? So what's going to be your solution to covering the long-term care costs? Okay, so let's talk about some funding options. There are 3 main types of funding options for long-term care. The first are government programs and entitlements like Medicare and Medicaid. The second are out-of-pocket funding options. You can use your personal assets, your income if you're still working, or a spouse or somebody else is working to help provide you with that income to pay for your care. You could use investments, you could use a reverse mortgage, and there are lots of other things too. Then the third option is that you can use insurance, or you can create a mix of out-of-pocket opportunities as well as insurance, as well as cash and so on. So let's let's go a little bit deeper into health insurance. What do you believe is typically covered by health insurance and what is not? I think our eyes are always drawn to this red thing here, which says long-term care is not covered by health insurance. And that is in fact true. Long-term care is not considered a health issue, even though it kind of is. But as far as medical insurance is concerned, medical insurance or health insurance does not cover long-term care needs. What is covered by health insurance can be some skilled or acute care, like when you go to the doctor or you go to a rehab facility or you go to the ER. Those are things that are covered by regular health or medical insurance. I mentioned the rehab care, and sometimes if you have to go to intermediate care, that will be covered. It's similar to skilled care, but it's not necessarily on a daily basis. So those things will be covered by health insurance, but long-term care is not. Now, what about Medicare? Medicare actually does not pay for long-term care. Medicare will cover nursing home care for a limited time, typically up to 100 days, if certain conditions are met. So I got the next information I'm going to talk about is actually off the Medicare website. So if you have Part A and you have days left in your benefit period to use, Medicare will cover it. Medicare will also cover a qualifying hospital stay. They will cover you if a doctor has decided that you need daily skilled care, but it must be given by or be under the supervision of skilled nursing or therapy staff. And you can get those kinds of services in a skilled nursing facility that's certified by Medicare. You'll need those skilled services for a medical condition that's either hospital related or if it's a condition that started while you were getting care in a skilled nursing facility for a hospital related condition. So if you qualify for short-term Medicare coverage in a skilled nursing facility, Medicare will pay 100% of the cost, the room, the meals, the nursing care, etc. But they'll only pay for that. They'll only pay 100% of the cost for the first 20 days. And then for days 21 through 100, you'll pay a daily copay. And if you remain in the skilled nursing facility longer than 100 days, you are responsible for the full cost unless you have additional insurance like Medigap insurance that's going to cover it. So a lot of people mistakenly believe that Medicare covers everything for as long as they're in a nursing home. And I hope that all of you understand at this point it does not. And so it still requires planning on our part to make sure we take care of this type of long-term care need if we have it. Okay, another interesting fact. 57% of Americans over the age of 40 always tell me, they always say that they plan to rely on Medicare to cover their long-term care. So if you were expecting Medicare to cover your needs, your long-term care needs, don't feel like you're alone, because you're not. So as I mentioned, people come to me all the time and when I ask them what their long-term care plan is, they say, well, Medicare will cover it, right? Once I turn 65. And I say, no, and so I have to explain what Medicare does and doesn't cover. So let's move on then. Okay, let's talk about Medicaid. Now, Medicaid, although Medicaid does cover some long-term care, qualifying for Medicaid requires that you meet very strict asset and income eligibility requirements, and so it's typically going to limit the type of care you have. And I also want to point out that Medicaid winds up paying for much of the long-term care that Americans need, but often it's because people had to spend down their assets as they received long-term care, and eventually they reached a point where they truly do qualify just simply due to their asset spend down. So when it comes to Medicaid, some people will also mistakenly believe that Medicaid will cover the cost, and they don't understand that they have such strict requirements or they have to spend all their money, pretty much all their money. There are some things that are covered in order to qualify for Medicaid, but the requirements do vary by state. So if you thought you were going to stay in Texas, and then at the last, the last couple of years, you say, oh, I want to move closer to my grandkids or my adult children, and you move to California. That's a totally different Medi-Cal. They use Medi-Cal in California, but it's a totally different Medicaid type of program. And Medicaid, if you're relying on Medicaid to help cover your long-term care costs, you tend to typically have much more limited options, and you may have to be on a waiting list to get into some of those facilities. All right, so Medicaid requires a person or a couple to basically spend down their assets to become eligible for the Medicaid benefit and any of Medicaid's long-term care benefits. So as you can see here, the maximum amount, and this is listed for 2020, although it varies by state, but the maximum amount of countable assets that applicants can have in their name to qualify for Medicaid is only $2,000 for individuals and only $3,000 for married couples. Now, I want to mention a very sad story, not to bring anybody down, but just to really and truly, I hope this is all for your benefit, just to make you think about this. I, on more than one occasion, have met couples that told me that they decided to get a divorce in their older age because they could get $4,000 as opposed to $3,000. And it was, now doing something like that has very severe repercussions, because think about if you have assets that you expected to leave to your spouse. If you're no longer married, those assets don't go to your spouse anymore. So, people may not always think about the consequences of their decisions because they don't know all of the things that it affects. So I hope and I try to explain to people, look, there's a better way for us to structure this. We just have to plan ahead so that you don't have to get a divorce when you're 75 years old, especially when you don't want to. So now let's talk about just briefly, you see here this maximum amount of countable assets that a healthy spouse can retain in order for your spouse to qualify. So if you're healthy but your spouse is not, you're allowed to retain $128,000. But again, we have to make sure that we're doing some really good financial planning to make sure that you don't lose those kinds of assets and that you understand what those assets actually are. And as you can see here, it's things like a car, a house, those kinds of things. But there are some other things that you can also maintain. Okay, so it's really important to understand that while you can pay for your long-term care costs on your own, and many people actually end up doing that, paying for long-term care costs by income or by repositioning your assets or paying from savings, it can come with potential downsides. So if we can just plan ahead, then we can protect our income, we can protect our assets, we can protect our savings. So if we have to, though, and many people do this, as I just mentioned, if we have to use our annual income, remember that's going to impact your lifestyle. If you remember several slides ago, I mentioned that a family may not be able to go on vacation because now they're having to pay for long-term care costs. If you use your qualified personal assets like a 401k or a Roth IRA, that could have some tax consequences. And if you use your savings, then you don't really have a lot of leverage, and you're taking money out of your pocket that you've saved for years and years and spending it on something that's going to go pretty quickly. So this is why a lot of times other people, or many people, will start looking into reverse mortgages. They'll sell their land or their homes. If they have extra real estate, they'll sell some extra real estate that they may have. They might downsize and move from, sell their home and then move into an apartment or something like that. Or really and truly, they'll start asking their children to help them out, or their children will offer. Okay, so let's talk about some long-term care coverage options. So these are some of the things that can help pay for long-term care, and there are two primary types of long-term care funding options available. You can look at options that are income financed and options that are asset financed. Now, what I mean when I say income financed is when you get a policy that you typically are going to purchase through a monthly or an annual premium, then those policies are designed to help pay for long-term care services and related costs like durable medical equipment, installing a ramp, having somebody come out and modify your home, those kinds of things. Then there are also the asset financed options. And these types of policies or vehicles are going to be funded by repositioning your assets, and they will also provide some long-term care coverage as well as a life insurance or death benefit. So let's talk about some differences between the two types of coverage. The asset finance type of solution, as you can see here, includes a death benefit as well as a return of premium option. For extra comfort and security, you might choose to have an asset finance policy set up so that it allows you an option to receive a full refund of all your premiums paid into the policy, of course, minus any claims that were paid to you, but that can be available as long as there haven't been any policy loans or surrenders, and there's some very fine details that we have to consider. And I also always mention to people that where the rubber hits the road is in those details. So always make sure that the person that you're working with, your financial planner or whoever is talking to you about a long-term care policy of any sort, that they really know the details of the policy. And feel free to ask them, because people should know if they're offering this as an option for you. They should know the answers to some pretty detailed questions. Okay, also, when we talk about some tax qualifications, as you see under both the income and the asset financed options, we mean that long-term care benefits are tax-free. So the federal government allows some tax incentives for people as well as businesses that purchase tax-qualified long-term care insurance policies. So there are some options to save money, or save taxes, I should say, if you have long-term care insurance. All right, let's talk a little bit more about income or asset financed options. So you'll see that with the income financed option, you'll have, as well as the asset financed option, you'll have protection in terms of all those activities of daily living, right? The thing that you'll see with the biggest difference on this slide is that with the asset financed option, you actually have a life insurance death benefit that goes along with it. So if it's just income financed and you're talking about traditional long-term care insurance, there is nothing, typically, there is nothing that is left to any beneficiaries, even if you never ever touched your policy benefits. With asset financed options, you do, in fact, or you are in fact able to leave a death benefit to a beneficiary. Okay, so long-term care benefit eligibility is the same pretty much in both types of policies. Okay, so they are triggered when you need help with at least 2 of 6 ADLs. I have seen a few policies that require 3 of them, and some of them will even say, and one of the requirements that you must need is X. And so sometimes they get very, very specific on those things. But many of them will say 2, you must have the need for 2 or more ADLs, or you must have a cognitive impairment. And so typically, if you have been diagnosed with dementia or maybe some, Parkinson's disease, where it has now gotten to the point where it has affected cognition, then there may be the opportunity to now receive your long-term care benefits. Okay, so let's talk about what we want to keep in mind. First of all, insurance solutions really don't just provide financial benefits. So, um, if you create a roadmap, you can relieve some pressure on yourself, on your family, on your friends. And so sometimes having a care planner can be extremely helpful. And some policies, some companies will actually offer care planners that will assist you along the way. And sometimes it's really beneficial to have those care planners, because in the policies, they'll say, if you use our care planner, then we will reimburse you for any out-of-pocket cost prior to when your benefits started kicking in. And by that, I mean there's an elimination period typically, which we can talk about in just a little bit. Now, when it comes to the tax incentives, the government, as we mentioned before, does provide tax incentives for individuals and businesses that purchase tax-qualified long-term care policies, and the benefits that you receive are typically tax-free. And some policies, if they are set up in certain ways, they can meet state partnerships. And what we mean by state partnerships is that if you get, some states will allow you to qualify for Medicaid if needed, while you protect a portion of your assets. And so this is called a state partnership. So this means that in some states they say, okay, you can protect some of your assets and still qualify for Medicaid, but you have to meet certain criteria in order to do that. Again, planning. All right, so a lot of people, as I mentioned earlier, say, my goodness, long-term care insurance must be so expensive, but it's really not if you plan ahead. So as you can see here, I like to talk about having lots of buckets of money. And so if you have a bucket of money set aside for long-term care, let's just say your bucket of money is worth $164,000. And you are an average male at age 55, that bucket of money may only cost you $143 a month. And you can use that bucket of money whenever you need it, as long as you meet the criteria, 2 or more ADLs or a severe cognitive impairment. So, this is just an average or a hypothetical example. Let's take a look at a female that is, and the male example was just for like pure long-term care insurance. But what if we look at an average female that buys coverage that uses one of those, what we call those hybrid products, those asset finance products like life insurance plus long-term care together. You can put in, for example, 50,000, 25,000, 30,000. The number here doesn't really matter. I'm just using this as a hypothetical example. But say the average 55-year-old female, fairly healthy, puts in 50,000 and says, okay, how much insurance can I get, long-term care and life? How much can I get for $50,000? And so you can see that the long-term care bucket that she has just purchased is worth $229,000. And the life insurance bucket that she has purchased is worth about $76,000. So the way something like this works is, if you never ever touch your long-term care bucket of money, then, and you pass away, then the life insurance benefit will be paid to your beneficiary. So you've put in 50,000, your beneficiaries get 76. Okay, now depending on when certain circumstances occur, that may be a really good return on your investment. Okay, if you need to use long-term care benefits, you need the services, and you live a long time and you have a lot of long-term care costs, the way it typically works is you will dip into the $76,000 bucket first, and then once you exhaust that $76,000 bucket, you're now going to start touching into that remaining bucket up to $229,000. Now, just because you've exhausted that $76,000 bucket doesn't mean that your beneficiaries will never get anything. With several different types of policies that are set up like this, you will, and this is again some of that detail thing, but you will still have a death benefit that will be sent or provided to your beneficiary. And it can be a different percentage based on the on the carrier that you're using. Okay, so here's what policyholders say today, people that actually have long-term care policies in place. About 3/4 of the people that have long-term care insurance, the traditional type of long-term care insurance, say that if they didn't have a policy, they would have received less care. 2/3 of people that have long-term care insurance say that they would have had to rely on their family and friends to make up that gap if they didn't have these benefits. And again, about 2/3 say that they would have never even been able to pay for their current levels of care if they didn't have the coverage or the protection. So now that kind of brings us to living a long life, having that peace of mind. It's really important for a lot of people. I've worked with a lot of families that have said to me, thank God my mom and dad put this in place. Thank God I put this in place. I've had, people in their 40s and 50s, starting to really ask me, what's the best time for me to get long-term care? And the truth is as long as you're healthy, the younger you are, the better, because as we age, even though we may still remain very healthy, many times what I see happening is somebody will end up on blood pressure medication or on cholesterol medication, or they might develop diabetes, or, it just really depends on your personal family's medical history, what you may or may not end up needing to work with or plan for in the future. So having the peace of mind is so relieving and stress relieving to many families. So we all know that living a long life is a probability, but I like to say planning for it is a necessity. How you plan for your long life is up to you, because you really and truly have the control. Long-term care planning just creates some added peace of mind. And I'd also like to mention that many times when I'm helping people with their retirement planning, there are a couple of things that I see that can kind of blow up the entire plan. One is taxes, the other is long-term care. If you don't plan for both of those, you could lose or eat up a lot of what you've worked so hard to protect and gain. So, kind of as a recap, some key questions that you'd like to think about is, who is your who person? Remember I mentioned that earlier. Does your who person know that they are the who person? Does your daughter, does your son know? Does your spouse know that if anything happened to you, you expect them to take care of you? So share start having those discussions. Who's going to take care of you? And I just mentioned that. Do they know that you want them to have that responsibility? They may not be emotionally or maybe even physically able to take care of that responsibility. And then think about, how are you going to fund that long-term care if and when you need it? And how would spending thousands of dollars a month, as we saw it can cost, an average of $5,000 for an assisted living, how would spending $5,000 a month, $60,000 a year, just for room and board and some basic care, how would that impact your family? How would that impact your retirement plan? And then if you have a written plan in place and you have it set up and you know which buckets of money you're going to dip into, how would that make you feel? Would it make you feel prepared, secure, or would it make you feel like, oh, I still have some planning to do? Think about how it would make you feel, though, if you did have it all planned out. So keep in mind also that your plan may or may not come from just insurance alone. In fact, a lot of times I help people to create, when we're talking about creating the plan, as we're creating the plan, we don't just put all of our eggs in one basket. We create lots of different buckets that we can dip into. and that can do double duty. So it makes sense for many people, it makes sense to use some insurance as well as personal funding. And it also makes sense to look at the plan every year and just kind of fine tune it as you go along, because maybe from one year to the next something has happened, and so you need to readjust things. Maybe the market went down, maybe you developed some kind of illness, who knows. But every year we probably should take a look at it, and then sit down every once in a while with your family, with your financial advisor, with your tax advisor, your CPAs, etc., so that you can talk about how these things are going to affect you. Remember, I said one of the things that can blow up a retirement plan is taxes. This is why I mentioned please talk to your tax advisor or your CPA about those things. Okay, so if insurance is going to be a part of your plan, it is more difficult, believe it or not, to go through the underwriting process for long-term care insurance than it is to get a life insurance plan or policy. And that is because the likelihood that you are going to use it is much, much greater. And so insurance companies are going to look at anybody applying for long-term care with a much finer toothed comb to make sure that the risk is good for them to take for you. So your insurability can change at any time. I know that some people had been planning to apply for long-term care. They went and saw a doctor and they were diagnosed with early onset dementia, and now they're no longer eligible. So time is truly important. It is of the essence in some cases. And so if you, for example, have a history of dementia in your family, the younger you are when you get long-term care insurance in place, the cheaper it will be, and you know that it can never be taken away from you, and you'll be set. You'll have at least a plan or part of your plan in place. And people, as you can see here, are more likely to qualify for long-term care, as I mentioned, the younger you are. So those things are important to keep in mind. Okay, I don't think we really need to go through this whole underwriting process, but I do just want to mention a few things that a lot of people will ask me about. And typically people are curious about, what is that underwriting process like? It seems like it's scary. It's really not that bad. They want to know some basic information. They want to know all your doctors, what you've seen them for, especially in the past 5 years. They want to know, all of your medical diagnoses, your prescription medications, what medications do you take? They will also ask for over-the-counter medications as well. So be aware of that. They want to know what kind of habits you have. And, do you exercise regularly? Do you watch your diet? Do you smoke? Do you drink a lot of alcohol? How often? One of the things that also makes a big difference, even if people don't think about it, is how socially active are you? Do you meet your friends every week for dinner, or do you go on vacations, things like that? Because healthy mind, healthy body. And so it makes a big difference. And so luckily, long-term care underwriters take a look at these things. And of course, the basic stuff, they want to look at your height, your weight, your blood pressure, your cholesterol. If you have, high blood sugar, that's also a big thing. They'll also look at other things like if you have sleep apnea, that can be a huge issue. So these are just some of the things that they look at. And not any one thing alone other than dementia, but typically they're going to look at the entire picture. And whoever you're working with, if you decide to use insurance as a part of your plan, whoever you're working with, make sure you have a pretty detailed and open, honest discussion with them about where you are medically and how you take care of yourself, because that person that you're working with should be able to fight for you and say, look, although I know, they, maybe they're not within their ideal body weight range, but their lab work over the last 5 years has, consistently shown that all of their, all the blood work is very good. It's all within normal limits. So this person has some good genes. So just, think about those things, and don't be afraid of the underwriting process. We all have to go through it. Okay, so we've already kind of talked about that. Again, I just want to mention that the sooner the better. if you can fine tune your long-term care plan early on, revisit it every year so that if things change, you get it taken care of, then we can, you can definitely have that peace of mind we talked about. So, just to kind of recap, we've talked about a lot of things, and we've talked about your health, your family, your relationships, the financial security, and how if you have a long-term care plan in place, it not only protects your financial assets, but it also protects your emotional assets. It protects your family. It protects, your grandchildren, your children, your grandchildren, and these are some of the things that some people think, oh, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. But better to see the bridge, plan for the transportation across it, than to be right up on that bridge and say, oh my gosh, I don't have a vehicle to get me through this part of my life. So thank you very much. Rob, should we go ahead and open it up for questions or comments?
Yes, if you will stop sharing your screen for me, we're going to do a couple of things real quick. One, I'm going to give you a chance to catch your breath. Thank you for all that, lots of information and lots of amazing information. Give everybody a chance to digest it for just a minute and think about what questions they would like to ask. We talked about some of your best health is taking care of yourself now. And so I'm going to show you another real quick video. We're very fortunate to have the folks over at Baylor Scott & White Health as our presenting sponsor for this year for the Pflugerville Conference. And so a very quick video from them with information about their services.
At Baylor Scott & White Health, there's nothing more important to us than your well-being. Over the last several weeks, we've done a number of modifications to our emergency room so you can continue to get the care you need when you need it. We're regularly cleaning and disinfecting frequently touched surfaces in our lobbies and patient areas. When you arrive, a screener will check your temperature, and we're requiring everyone to wear masks. When it comes to registration, we've got a no-touch process. You just answer a few simple questions. We'll get you back to our room as quickly as possible. We want you to be well informed and not ignore symptoms that could indicate a potentially serious condition. In those situations, it's critical you don't delay. To learn more about all we're doing to help keep you safe, visit bswhealth.com/safecare.
And if you are in Pflugerville itself, Pflugerville has the new Baylor Scott & White Medical Center that is right there off of I-30. And they have some fantastic free programs that they offer for older adults in the community. Some of those have been slowed down because of COVID, but they do offer a walk with the doctor each week where they go to the park and you walk with the doctor and you've got a medical professional one-on-one that you can ask them questions while you walk and get your exercise, which is really fantastic. Speaking of exercise, our partners over at the Pflugerville Community Church also have their Health Nuts weekly exercise group. I believe that because of COVID, they're doing a lot of things on Zoom right now, but if you look in your program, I'm going to go back to that program that we sent to you, there's information in there on that. It's another free program, really an amazing, very active group. And so really recommend that because as Lauren has said, the more that we can do now to help preserve our health, the better. And our big three: stay socially active, eat well, stay physically active. And those things are going to help us live a much healthier, longer life. But you and I were talking before we started the presentation today about, because we are all living so much longer, it's not if we're going to need the long-term care, it's when we're going to need the long-term care, because we are living a much longer life. And so we are living easily into our 90s and in many cases into hundreds. I saw a statistic just the other day that living to 100 is going to be the new normal. And so in order to plan for that, we have to plan for the cost of that last stage in our life, because we want to stay healthy, we want to stay comfortable with the limitations that age brings to us. So you talked about different buckets. So let's go back to that if we can. How are people that you're working with and people here in Central Texas right now, what are they doing to pay for these costs? Because we're looking at, as you showed, $5,000 for a skilled nursing. I know that memory care is somewhere around $8,000 a month. And the average person who goes into these facilities will be there for 3 to 5 years. So that's a lot of money and a long time. So what are some of the ways that you advise folks to prepare for that, to look at those different buckets, and talk a little bit about what you mean by pulling from different buckets?
Sure. So you mentioned something earlier I'm just going to touch on real quick before I really kind of talk about the money part. It is very true. People are living longer because they are healthier and because of medical technology and advancements, right, in medicine. So we are living longer. A long time ago, people used to retire at 60 and they, might live only another 2 years. So retirement wasn't very long, or they might live 5 years, not very long. Then, people started retiring later and later as we became more technologically advanced. And now, if you have a white collar job and you are, fairly healthy and you exercise, you could very truly live to 100, 121. And in fact, the insurance actuarial scientists base they base your life insurance plans, for example, up to age 121. So, living longer is not, it's really no longer a dream. It's happening. We're seeing people live a lot longer now. And so what that means is that we're working for, let's say, you work for 40 years, but you still live another 30 or 40 years. How are you planning to pay for all of that? So people are doing all kinds of things. They're working longer. They're trying to save more. They're doing all kinds of different things. So people are doing a lot of things. And part of that is planning for their long-term care needs. So most people nowadays are looking at lots of different things. They're setting up lots of different buckets. What I typically find is that most people feel most comfortable when they have several buckets that they can pull from if and when they need long-term care. Because a lot of the question I get is, well, what's going to happen if I only have one bucket of money for long-term care, what's going to happen to that bucket if I never use it? Like, what if something happens to me and I don't need long-term care and I pass? So I always say, well, let's figure out how we can set up different buckets of money that have or serve more than one goal. So we've got buckets of money that can help you not only pay for long-term care, but can also help you with your vacation every year, or that can you can invest in the market. And so it's growing every year, hopefully, right? So that it's growing every year. So we typically use long-term care insurance, and you can have more than one long-term care insurance policy. You don't have to have just one, but keep in mind, if you start having too many, and typically the answer is only two, but if you start having too many, carriers will start wondering, what is she doing or what is he doing? So you might have a traditional policy, and then you might have one of those hybrid policies. That's not uncommon for people to have those things. And many times what the reason they'll do that is, remember I mentioned tax is one of the biggest things that blow up a retirement plan? So the reason that they'll do that is because even though long-term care benefits are tax-free, the other part of that is inflation. And inflation and long-term care costs consistently, and college, those are three costs that consistently keep increasing year after year after year. So some people will get a hybrid policy, and then to kind of cover the inflation costs, they will get a smaller long-term care traditional policy. And if that's not enough, then we start having, we put aside buckets of money for investments. We look at 401ks, and we may pull out of the 401k and put it into something that we know can be a consistent, steady stream of income for the rest of our lives, no matter how long we live. We can never outlive that bucket of money. Sometimes we look at the Roth IRAs and pull money out of there and put it into those same types of vehicles that we will never outlive. So it just depends on, the person's situation. We also can liquidate assets. We can just look at the cash in the bank. Where's the best place for that cash to go? And then we start creating these buckets in different places so that we can make sure we have money that we will never outlive. And once we start putting those kinds of things together, it really helps people to feel at ease because they know that they're going to be okay. Another thing I typically take a look at, because I mentioned I like to be, I try to cover all my bases. But another thing I'll typically look at is, were you ever in the military? Do you have VA benefits? Because VA benefits can help a lot of families. It doesn't really matter how much money you have. If you're a veteran, you should be able to qualify for some benefits. And so looking into that is something that can help a lot too. And if we need to, we can always look at how Medicare and Medicaid can be part of the plan if it needs to be part of the plan. The other thing is for some families, they say, what, my children are wanting to help, and so we've got help from the kids coming too. $1,000 from here, $1,000 from there, and so again, it's like a puzzle, and we just piece it together. But we've got buckets of money in all these different places, and that allows us to really create some pretty solid long-term care plans. And then every year we just look at everything and say, okay, now we need to plan for this, and now we need to add this to it, and now we need to pull from here. And a lot of times I'll help people look at where they're going to pull money from at different points along the path.
Yeah, a lot of times it's scary when you start thinking about these big numbers of monthly cost for care, but people don't realize that they do have a lot of value in their home and in their life insurance policies. And there's places where you can take a little here, a little there, and suddenly you've got a basket full of eggs. And
that's right.
And it's surprising that a lot of people don't think about the values, that things that they have of value.
Right.
And how they can utilize those. And I think, like you said, the veterans benefits is a tremendous opportunity. There's so many great benefits that come with the Veterans Administration. We talked about Medicare and Medicaid, and that's certainly not someplace that that's not a basket we need to put all of our eggs when it comes to thinking about the long-term care. A lot of people think that Medicaid can be their savior, that, I'll just spend down and now I'll qualify for Medicaid. But Medicaid, especially here in Central Texas, doesn't afford you very much, does it?
Right. No, it doesn't. If you'll think back to one of the slides I showed, it was just one brief slide, and it spoke about if you have a Medicaid, if you qualify for Medicaid, you'll have to spend down a lot of your assets to the tune of not having more than about $2,000 in assets for an individual or $3,000 for a married couple. But that excludes things like, you can have a house worth up to so much and a car worth up to so much. And you can also have, burial arrangements up to so much. So there are some allowances that are not counted into that, but it's definitely not something that most people want to plan for or plan on. But I will tell you that there are some families that has to be a part of their plan. And so we have to be very, very strategic about when those, how we move the money around and how things are going to be set up, because Medicaid has some very specific things like look backs and so on that we have to be aware of. So again, with the planning, we can take care of that. But if you're in a situation where you have a long-term care event that happens quite suddenly and you don't have anything in place for it, then the Medicaid may not be an option. And I've met and worked with many families who have come to me in desperation and said, yes, my mom has, a 401k that's worth, 150,000. And from what I've been looking at, that's going to be gone in a year and a half. And that's the truth. It'll be gone in a year and a half if there's no other assets. And then at that point, now you're ready for Medicaid. And, they thought that Medicaid or Medicare will cover it, but it just doesn't.
Yeah, Medicaid can be useful. It's a
Mhm.
useful tool, but it's certainly not where you need to, bank on it. This is my only thing I'm going to plan toward. Of course, there are families that don't have a lot of assets. We've always rented. We've never owned a house. Worked in the service industry. I don't have a 401k or anything like that as my backup.
Mhm.
So Medicaid may be the only option. And
Right.
as you mentioned, because we are all living so much longer, when Medicare and Medicaid were created, it's exactly like you said, people would retire mid-60, maybe live a couple, 3 more years. And so that's how Medicaid was created.
Right.
Well, now our life expectancy is 30 years more, but Medicaid, Medicare never changed.
Right.
And now we've got so many more people in addition who are dipping into that pot, and that pie has not gotten any bigger. And now you've got more people taking bites out of that pie. So, Medicare, Medicaid that's not your good only solution, but it can be a part of the
Correct.
system. Also with Medicaid, it only pays for skilled nursing. So it's not going to pay
That's
for
true.
the assisted living. It's not going to pay for memory care. It's only going to pay for the skilled nursing. And those beds are kind of far and few between here in Central Texas.
That's true. That's true. So, I think maybe some people, when they come to me, one of the things they say, okay, well, if Medicaid doesn't pay for it, Medicare will. And I don't think a lot of people understand the difference between
Mhm.
the two, right? So Medicare is health insurance for the aging and the disabled and so on, right? And there are typically some criteria you have to meet, like you have to be 65 years of age or older, or you have to meet certain criteria before you qualify for Medicare and so on. So Medicare is really like your health insurance. Medicaid is a financial, more of a financial, it's fiscal or financial assistance for the aging, the elderly, the disabled, and so on. And so that's why, for Medicare, we're talking about first 20 days being covered at 100%, days 21 to 100 at only 80%, and then after 100 days, it's up to you to cover it. It's a health insurance policy, whereas Medicaid, it's a financial opportunity for some people or for those people that need it, but its own, it has its own set of rules. With the assets must be under 2 or 3,000, and so on. So there's a difference between Medicare and Medicaid, and not everybody always understands that. So yeah, it's very important to, if you want that to be part of your plan, you plan ahead. I
Right.
can't stress enough how important it is to plan ahead. Every single family I've ever worked with has always said to me, whether or not they had long-term care insurance, they have always said to me, if I had not have planned ahead, I would not have the peace of mind that I have now. And pretty much all of them that have planned ahead have always created, they've always tried to make sure that they've taken care of those things that could blow up their plan, like long-term care, taxes, inflation, all those things. And especially because healthcare costs are rising so significantly and so quickly, that planning for expected long-term care costs, if you can self-fund it, that's wonderful. But even those that can self-fund it, I often ask them, okay, tell me why you want to self-fund it. If you can put somebody else on the hook,
Yeah.
why would you spend your own money out of your pocket when you could plan strategically for something like that?
Right. And like we said, it's not the if you're going to need this plan, it's when. And
Right.
so, we know that it's something that's always very difficult to talk about, especially when we're visiting with our parents and helping them to put together their plans. We don't want to talk about money. We don't want to talk about death.
Right.
But the reality is we are all going to die at some point. So we need to have that plan in place. And we're all going to need some help as we age.
Right.
Um, and it's the person who's very few and far between that gets to live in their home by themselves, completely healthy until they just walk out in the garden one day and drop dead. all of us are going to need some help. All of us need to come up with these plans. We need to think forward, because the worst scenario is you have a major medical issue, you have a stroke, something happens, and suddenly we have to be in nursing care. And we get the sticker shock of how much that's going to cost us.
Right.
And we're like, what do I do now? So having that plan in place in advance is so much easier. It just alleviates so much worry. And when the time comes, even if we're easing into our transition into long-term care,
Mm-hmm.
we know that everything's fine, everything's taken care of. I wanted to ask one more question here. We talked about the different types of long-term care. And we have independent care, assisted living, nursing care, and memory care. And most people don't realize that independent care is not covered by either Medicaid or Medicare. So,
Nor is it covered by long-term care.
right, long-term care insurance doesn't cover that either.
Right. So a lot of times people come to me and say, oh yes, my mother or my father, my parents both have just moved into ABC independent living community. And so are they eligible now for benefits? Can they access their long-term care benefits? And the answer is typically, it depends. The answer is no, if they don't need any assisted living, or if they don't meet the criteria for the 2 or more ADLs. If they, you can live in an independent living community and need and utilize home care services or assisted living services, but you don't necessarily have to live in an assisted living community. So if you meet the criteria, no matter where you live, at home, independent living, assisted living, and whatever, as long as you meet those criteria. But just be aware that just because somebody moves into an independent living community, because it's a lot easier, you've got your room, you've got your board, you've got, many times you'll have housekeeping services, you'll have all your meals cooked for you, so there's a lot of alleviation of stress and, of living in your own home versus living in a independent living community. But that's not long-term care. Right? That's a difference. That's a choice of living arrangement or residential arrangement. It is not long-term care. Long-term care kind of rides that gray line, kind of sits on the fence between medical and non-medical. And so it means that you need a little bit of help with some activities of daily living, but you may not need a ton of help. And to be able to get that service, no matter where you live, at home or in a community, you can have that service, but you still have to have the need for 2 or more assistance with 2 or more ADLs.
And so much of our industry has changed. It used to be that we just had, every town had their nursing home. The one size fits all, that's where when you got to the point, that's where you went. But you talk about home health care. There are so many different levels of home health care now than there used to be. There's so many different levels, long-term care housing and senior communities than there used to be. And it's, unless you work in that industry, you really don't know what it is that's available, what you need. And so it's always so smart to go to ask those questions of somebody who knows that. For example, here at AGE, we have our resource center so that you can contact us and we can give you free information and help you along wherever you are in your journey. At the same time, when you're looking at your financial health, it is so smart to always go to a financial planner, because they're going to be able to know all the things that are available, because the industry changes so much. There's so many new things that are available that you don't know about. So it just makes perfect sense. You go to the doctor for your physical health.
That's right.
Go to a financial planner for your financial health, because it's going to be a very, almost, if not more important as you age, to make sure that your finances are in place. Right. So that, if you're going to stay healthy and happy, it's going to take money. We know that, unless you want to live on the street in tent. You're going to have some money.
We don't want that.
Live. We don't want any of that. Later this week in our sessions, we're at the end of this week, Keith Ludy from Barnett and Ludy Law Firm is going to be talking about the financial issues of aging. And so a lot of the things that, Lorna, that you mentioned, we're going to talk about those. We talked about Medicare, Medicaid. We know that we're coming up on open enrollment. So I want to give a shout out to our friends over at the Area Agency on Aging for the capital area. They have got free advice. They've got folks who are experts in Medicare and Medicaid. They can help you navigate through that open enrollment and help explain to you the differences. And, you know, you've got all of these add-ons now and what's going to change in next year. So because it's a free service, you pay for it with your taxes. Give them a call and let them help you with the open enrollment if you're looking at making any changes to your Medicare or your Medicaid coverage, because now is the time that we're going to be doing that. Lorna, thank you so much for spending the morning with us, sharing your expertise. We really appreciate it. You always have such great information for us, and we're just grateful to know that there are a lot of great options, that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, that we have our individual options based on our needs. But as always, you want to talk to that financial planner because they're going to be able to help you put together that puzzle, find those buckets, and get you prepared, because it's not the if, it's the when. You're going to need that information.
And just always remember too that just even a little bit of planning is better than no planning at all.
Yes. Yeah. At least, it's as long as you're starting down the street, that's better than sitting on the porch. And if your goal is down here, then get off the porch and start walking that direction. That's always the hardest part for a lot of people, is just to get started. But once you get started on that plan, even if it's something as simple as talking to the kids and saying, this is what my wishes are. Okay, at least now it's out, it's verbalized. Okay, great. So that's step one. Step two, how are we going to get there? And we just start moving down the street. That's such a great thing to point out to us. Tomorrow, we're going to have Baylor Scott White with us. We're going to talk about COVID. We're going to talk about what's happening now. What do we think's coming down the pike? What do we know? What don't we know? We're going to get it straight from the horse's mouth from those professionals. On Thursday, we're going to talk about brain health. We talk about keeping ourselves healthy. So we're going to talk about our brains, because that's the most important part of our health. And so we're going to talk about that. And then on Friday, we're going to talk about our financial planning. So Lorna, thank you so very much for joining us. For everyone who is at home joining us, we thank you so much. We will see you again tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much.